Oh, okay. Welcome to Book Comps, How to Find Them and Frame Them. Good afternoon, everybody. You're excited as I am for this panel. Um, just as some quick housekeeping, this event is hosted by Weeknight Writers. We have live captions thanks to Renaissance Press. We also have social areas and other channels and chat things in our Discord. So please feel free to follow those links. They are all in the chat. And we are going to start by introducing our panelists. So I'm going to just ask you guys to introduce yourselves with your name, your preferred pronouns, and a little bit about why you wanted to be on this panel today. Oh, and before I forget, I am Jade and I am moderating this panel today. Let's start with Manisa.
Hi, my name is Monisa, and my pronouns are she, her. Um, I've been I pursued traditional publishing. I pursue it, so I guess comps is something that even after you have an agent, when you're sending your book out to editors, you still have to think about comps. Just it's a part of the process constantly. So I'm still very much, even though I'm agented and I've sold a number of books. It's still something I need to think about every time I think of a new project. So yeah, that's why I thought this was an interesting panel.
Awesome. And Phoebe?
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Phoebe Lowe. I'm writing as PH Lowe. Is they them pronouns. And I'm on this panel because I thought I don't know, I just feel like comps are really like weird, interesting work in the publishing industry. I've interned and like worked for a few literary agencies for a couple years, and then just published my debut, These Stealthless Shores, last year. And I'm also continuing to attempt to sell books. So comps have been a really big part of that process. And yeah, just it's like I don't know, it feels like as an industry thing, kind of like a source of I don't know, just like a lot of things to talk about.
Absolutely. And Mona.
I'm Mona, pronoun she, her. I'm in central Indiana, and I've published a few books of poetry. I have a couple of novels that I haven't published yet. I'm not traditionally published. I was seeking the traditional public route, traditional publishing route. However, I gave it up, and I hope to publish my novels with a small indie press, the way I have been with my poetry books. Um, Comps are important to me because it lets everybody interested know where your book would be. And some people have the mistaken idea that only the traditional publishing world is interested in comps, but that's not true. I have sent my books to indie publishers in hopes of them accepting them. And they often ask me, what would you compare your book to? That is a comp in just a few more words. So people just don't understand sometimes that it's not just something you need if you're trying to get an agent.
Thanks, Mona. Yeah, very important to keep in mind. Okay, so let's dive in with our first question. What are a few key qualities or important aspects that you personally keep in mind when you go about choosing comp titles for a story? Does anybody want to go first?
I can if you
All right, Mona.
just to get it going.
Sure.
For me, it's important to be concise so that you don't use too many words,
Mm.
uh, but yet kind of get it as precise as possible. Um, that doesn't mean you have to have one comp to explain your entire book. because that would be kind of impossible. But something in another book that describes something in your book or compares to something in your book, and then something in another book that compares to something else in your book. And just to try to make it, I'm a poet at heart, so I try to make things as concise as possible, with the fewest words as possible. So that to me is very important.
Okay. Phoebe?
I can jump in. Yeah, I guess for me, maybe more in like the prose space. I tried to look for books in a similar like genre and age group. I think mostly because like my work sometimes straddles like the adult and the YA spaces, and so in terms of like where would it sit on the shelf, um, if I'm pitching something as adult, I want to look for like adult books to compare to versus YA. Um, and then, yeah, I guess just in terms of like other things I think about, there's a lot of like just like vibes of books that I like, or like character arcs, maybe like pacing, like premise, obviously, like and or just yeah, there's different like setting things that I think also because a lot of my writing is like inspired by other writing. So it's almost like, what books inspired me to come up with this work and like what does it feel like, or um what does the character voice kind of sound like? And then I guess similar to what Ona said, just like in terms of choosing, if you have like multiple options, kind of choosing, which of those options or like what elements of those options will kind of speak to the biggest, like the key things in your book, like what your
You
book
have like a
is
specific
most about.
example?
Oh yeah, sure. So I guess okay, I would like use the book I'm like
Sorry.
trying to pitch right now. But yeah, I guess for my debut Be Stuff with Chores, um, I kind of did like, you know, this book will appeal to fans of like She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan and Visions by V. Schwab. And so I chose this book because She Who Became the Sun has like a gender bending element, and it's also like has Asian characters, which I feel like sometimes publishers go wrongheadedly about that. But yeah, just like because it has those things and there's sort of like I don't know if there's like a revenge kind of motivation to that. And then I chose Vicious because um like really enjoyed the Schwab's writing style,
Again, that
and there's
revenge
also
motivation.
yeah, and also revenge motivation. And there's sort of like a time gap thing where,
Yeah.
this thing happens and then 10 years later, like it
Mhm.
kind of comes back to haunt all the characters, which is something that happens in my book as well. Yeah, so just trying to pick things that are like speak to the key elements of my book. And sort of there's like a former lost boy who like goes back and like becomes Captain Hook, and it's sort of um yeah, just wanting to have those like key elements of like revenge and sort of things like that.
Excellent. Vanessa?
Yeah, so I very much agree with what Phoebe said in terms of thinking about where your book would sit on a bookshelf, in a bookshop, or at the library, because that gives you an idea of what your comps are. Because the purpose of a comp is really to tell your editor or your agent or your reader what kind of book this is, and it lets the reader know that they would want to read it as well. So for me, what I think about is themes. What are some of the themes that you explore in your book? So in my most recent book, for example, The Fear Factory, which comes out next year, that's a middle grade horror. So the comps that I used for that book were middle grade horrors, of course, but also middle grade horrors that were similar in tone to the story that I was telling. So there's some middle grade horrors that are more funny. This is not as funny. This is more scary. So then I chose books that were more creepy. So my comps were The Girl and the Ghost, which is by Hannah Alcoff, and it's a brilliant book. I have it here somewhere. I could dig it out. voices to me were appropriate for that particular book. And also, it's a book that explores death. So I chose stories that had similar themes, loss and death. So yeah, I think you need to think about tone. You need to think about themes. You need to think about genre, and you need to think about age group. And I think if you keep those four things in mind, you can find similar books and then use those books as comps.
Wonderful. That's great. Okay. So how about when a story blends genres or has a particularly unique voice? What would your process be for finding and using comp titles that accurately reflect the spirit of the story without misleading agents or readers?
Well, what would the process be?
Yeah.
Um, my process is generally the same. I mean, I've only got two novels, so but I read them I if I can't read the whole thing, I read about them. And I can also read their comps and look at what they used to get an idea. Um, so for me, if you're asking about if they blend genres a little bit, right? Am I
If it's
right?
something that's like hard to find a direct comp for,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. I think a lot of books are hard to find a specific direct comp. Um, so I have two books, and they're like one and two, and in a series supposedly. And so my first one, the two comps I'm using are Matt Bell's Appleseed, and I say it's the corporate avarice of Matt Bell's Appleseed. So I chose only one tiny aspect of that book. And I think that's important if they switch or go back and forth and cover more than one genre. And then I also say the imaginative human made community in The World Gives Way by Marissa Levine. So
That's
there
brilliant.
again,
You've got very specific adjectives describing those comps
yeah,
too.
when you have different things in your novel, which a lot of times this is science fiction, and those of us who write in the speculative field will have a lot of different kinds of things.
It's what we're trying to do.
Exactly. So you just have to be picky, and use what stands out for you. The rest of The World Gives Way by Marissa Levine, it's a good book, but it doesn't fit my book as a comp. The rest of it, but it is a human made community, an imaginative human made community, and that fits my book as a comp. So that's how I go about it. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah. Give us some great thoughts there. Phoebe.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yes, being like really specific about what elements of your comps you're using is really helpful. Um, and also maybe like if you have like a specific blend of genres, like, oh, this is a sci-fi thriller, like maybe you can pick one sci-fi, one thriller, and it kind of like will alert like readers to, this being sort of an in-between. Um, and then I guess like in terms of unique voice, like I also feel like there's some situations where like if you're doing something like weird like formal experimentation or sort of just like different perspectives or something like that where like
Like
there
I want
because
to know
I
what
guess there
comps Jemison ended up using for like the Broken
like an
Earth.
all new yeah right but yeah I guess like I feel like it's also plausible to just use a book that is weird and say like that has formal experimentation of like
Like
of the Broken Earth.
groundbreaking in the same way as this book, but not
Right.
like
Like
it.
it's not you're not copying them, but you're saying like, oh, this is like different and like to the degree that,
Oh,
the
okay. So
theme is
if you
different or
can't find
something.
like a
Well, yeah.
precise match for theme, maybe look for something that innovated in a similar way.
Right. Yeah, like I don't know if
Okay.
anyone's read like Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhara, but like
I haven't
like
read that
it's
one.
so weird. But it's like just like you can say like there's like it spans time, it has like a different bunch of different perspectives, but just like yeah, like using those specific like weird things and like you're not doing the same thing, but you're sort of maybe like attempting a similar scale or something like that.
Okay, I like that. Manisa?
Yeah, I would say, just use that whole idea of something meets something. So I agree with everything that Phoebe and Mona have said. But to add to that, like you could take a component, one component of your manuscript, find a book that fits that, and then take another component and find another book that fits that, and then just say this meets this in, or the heart of this meets the tone of this in, and that's one way in which you can kind of like find a comp for your odd book that doesn't quite fit anywhere.
So like similar to what Mona was saying with the find your book and then come up with
Yeah,
really specific adjectives you can put in front of them
yeah,
to focus the agent or the
exactly. To
copy.
point out which aspect of the book, is it the tone? Is it the experimentation, if that's what you're looking for?
Excellent.
But I love what Phoebe said about the weirdness. Find a book that's really, really weird. It's like I read a book, some of you may have read it, How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, I think it is. And I love this book. It is a collection of short stories that all fit together to tell
Oh,
a
beautiful.
story. And it is weird. And I always thought, man, if I could just write something and use that as a comp, that would be an accomplishment. But that is the way to do it. The weirdness. That is awesome.
Excellent. Very good thoughts,
Read
all of
that now.
you.
I'm like adding to my TBR.
What?
I'm adding How High We Go in the Dark to my TBR, like
Yeah,
moving
me
it.
Oh
too.
my
I
gosh,
haven't
you
heard
have
it, but I
to.
definitely read a review and need to remember to put that on my list.
I'll put it the book and his name in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks. Moving right along. Uh, Popular and very well-known titles as comps. How do we feel about those? Are they a good idea? Do you use them? Why or why not? If you do use them, when is a good situation to use a very popular, very well-known titles as comps? And if not, what are your reasons for avoiding them? And I mean, like, when you see like this is the next Lord of the Rings or the next Sanderson or the next Margaret Atwood. How do you feel about using that as comps?
Can I pitch in on this? Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I would highly recommend not saying the next anything, because especially if you're using someone like,
A big
if you're
expectation to put on your
yeah,
book.
next Lord of the Rings, no one's going to believe you, so don't do that. But people love to use the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is used all the time as a comp, and sometimes it backfires because then people go in expecting a certain thing and then they never get it because nothing is the Hunger Games. But I do think that using the Hunger Games is clever because it always works. So I think, when do you use the Hunger Games? I think you use the Hunger Games when you have a concept that is very similar to this very specific book. Then you can use the Hunger Games. If you've got games where people are killing each other in your story, then you can say the Hunger Games meets something else in, you know,
Or
but
if you have like that tension where there's a thing going on the whole time, like they're always in danger and it's just different levels of it.
like, if you use the Hunger Games for that, you're going to have very angry readers, because I think that's not specific enough. It needs to be so
That's true.
specific. Do you know
There
what
we
I
go.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I would say if you're going to use something huge like the Hunger Games or Twilight or God, I'm not going to even use the Harry Potter, but
Oh God.
Twilight or Hunger Games. If you're going to use something of that magnitude, I would strongly suggest only using it if there is like compelling plot similarities that make those comps very apt.
Fair enough.
And then you'd have to be really careful because, like you say, I think, and I've heard agents talk about this a lot. If you're going to say your book is like Hunger Games or Twilight or Harry Potter or whatever, everybody's going to read that book expecting Hunger Games or Twilight or Harry Potter, and then, okay,
And
Why
not everybody gets
would
the same impression, even from a super
you?
famous book. So that may not
Yeah,
be an impression you want to cultivate.
it is not, especially with some of them. And and then you're going to be like, okay, did you just write another one like that?
Or if
Why
you're
did
not paying
you?
attention to social media, use
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
Harry Potter because I have a magic school and like don't
yeah, yeah.
understand the controversy that's
Uh-huh,
attached to some of the writing
exactly.
right now.
Yeah, so yeah, that can be bad. And if you say it's another Twilight or another Hunger Games, and if it's not, "Oh, you didn't write another Hunger Games. Well, why should I write another Hunger Games? It's very hard.
Yeah, I guess like from the agents that I've worked with, comparing something to like Game of Thrones or like Lord of the Rings is just kind of like, especially if you're like in speculative fiction, it is kind of frowned upon just because it's also like um it kind of gives the impression that someone hasn't necessarily read a lot of fantasy,
Mhm.
because they sort of are reaching for the like the foundation kind of a lot of like Western fantasy. And so um yeah, I think like that's also in terms of like what you guys were saying about like specificity. It's almost like, those things have been so kind of like riffed upon and like iterated that like citing the original is almost like, well, like, what about it? Because there's so much fantasy is like built on those kinds of settings, frameworks, etc. Um, yeah, I guess, yeah, also agreeing with um what Macy said, it's almost like I feel like it's almost like a spectrum where you have like, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, and then like versus like other books, like smaller books, but then like yeah, like there is sort of like people comping Hunger Games or like I feel like even Margaret Atwood, like Jade was saying, um, like there, if you are specific about, or if there's like, the women's, reproductive justice or something where you're really speaking to that, that there is like kind of a sweet spot where like well-known, you can speak to well-known works in your book in that way and sort of call that out. Um, but yeah, and again, also agreeing with all of you. It's almost like, yeah, like your comp is like a promise to the reader that they're going to have a certain thing. And so, like I would personally only comp something. And it's like, it's kind of scary too, because it's like, oh, I'm comping this like really big book for like option pitch. But like, it's like, oh, does your book really live up to that? Or like, express the, themes or the premise in a similar way. But yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, just wanting something that your book actually encompasses.
But it's also the fact of, like you said, you alluded to, Phoebe, that, well, if I'm comping to Lord of the Rings, they're going to question, have you read anything since the Lord of the Rings? Anything that's 3 years old? You know, um, that's a biggie right there.
I mean, that
Yeah.
brings up another interesting question. Should you ever comp to something you haven't read?
Can I just add on to what Mona said about the previous
Yeah,
thing, just real quick? If you are going to comp something really old and really famous, your next comp, because you need at least two, would have to be something recent. And just to show that you've read, so if you're going to be like, Hunger Games meets something that was published very recently. Yeah.
and why do you do that? Just, to expand on that
Just
point.
to just to make it clear to agents and editors that you read in your genre, because the Hunger Games is old, it's like 20 years old.
Good, good. Yeah,
Is it
excellent.
really? Oh my God.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh man. I don't even want to look at how
Yeah.
old the Lord of the Rings movies are anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what are some red flags that a comp title doesn't fit or isn't effective to represent your story? And what are some like pitfalls or things that you risk by using a title that doesn't fit?
Um, well, if the agent is reading a query or if the publisher is reading a query and they see comp titles, they're going to have an expectation in their mind just from your query. Hopefully, the comp titles might fit your actual book. And then if they asked for 10 pages or 50 pages and your pages don't fit that, they are going to probably see a problem with the writing or the writer. That's what I'm assuming. And I've heard them say similar things.
Phoebe?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's, yeah, in terms of what we've been talking about, sort of like accuracy and specificity, where, you can create an impression of, where your book should sit on the shelf, and then potentially like your the actual pages aren't maybe the same as you've been promising. Um, and yeah, that's just kind of one that I can think of in terms of like what comps are for, basically.
Yeah. So like if I don't have the comps I mentioned, if I don't have corporate avarice, or if I don't have a human-made world, then there's a problem.
Yeah, it's not going to get the correct impression. They may not pick it up. They may not want it, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything to add, Manisa?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I've never used a comp that I haven't read, because usually I use books that I'm like a fan of, because I think if you're like strapped for time, I can understand where you may not be able to read everything that comes out, especially because we need to use comps that are current. And it's hard to be reading all the time because you'd have to be just reading all the time. And, I do read all the to the point where you're reading everything that's recently published. I think that's very hard to do. So a tool you can use is to like maybe look at similar books in the library app to see what books show up, and then kind of like see if there's something that you've read. And that could be then a comp that you can use instead, or you could look for the wiki summary. I don't know. But I mean, there's some ways that you can get around it, I guess. I understand that it is very difficult to be just constantly up to date on the books that have come out.
Mm. Yeah, it can be stressful. I feel like it's also it's almost like books that you would naturally gravitate towards, is kind of like assuming that I'm interested in, the topics that my novel is addressing. It's like I try not to put too much pressure on myself to like read every single thing that's coming out. But if there's this like a similar theme, like, oh, this, for example, for my first book, like, oh, there's like, a revenge plot line, or like there's gender bending, or just like gender things in general, or like a fairy tale retelling, that might like pique my interest, and I would like look further into that book, versus sort of like I mean, I guess in terms of market awareness, like I kind of get an amount of that from like social media, where just like, deal announcements, or like people in my circles, or like authors I follow, are like saying that they sold things, but that like I try not to um push myself to like read every single thing, just because that's, yeah, like Anissa said, like pretty time consuming.
Yeah.
And the pumps, like I mentioned, how high we go in the dark. And it's about the same for the two comps I used in my query letter. They're 3 or so years old. And if I don't get this book published pretty soon, am I going to have to find new comps? That's a big question in my mind.
Mm. What, just out of curiosity, how old do you think is like too old for a comp, or for one of your comps, I guess?
I've heard 3 to 5 years. I've heard that from agents is the maximum. So
And would you say like the exception to that would be like if it's an extremely good fit and your other comp is a more recent book?
yeah, like Manisa said, but maybe Phoebe has a better answer because she's worked with literary agencies. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I've
just
also
heard.
heard like 5 years, but I'm also like since 2020, like time isn't real.
Yeah,
I
If
feel
yeah,
you
something's
on
like
that.
7 years, I'm just
that's
gonna be
true.
like,
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
Anything to add to that, Manisa?
No, I don't really. Yeah, I've never been very strict with like the time. So I don't use a comp that's like 2 years old. I tend to just use the comps that fit. But in my case, I'm severely compromised by the fact that, I'm brown. The stories I write are about brown kids, and I need to find a comp that fits the theme, that fits like the story, and then that's also about a brown kid and preferably of the same kind of brown as me. I mean, it's very hard. So I tend to give myself some slack. Yeah.
Fair enough.
That is.
So we do have a question from the audience, and Taurus asks, if you're querying a specific publisher, would using a book that they published as a comp be a turnoff for that publisher? Yes or no? Anybody want to take that one?
Oh gosh, I am the worst person to ask this because I never know who published what. I just go by the story. So I don't actually know if this is something they even look at or consider. I hope not. I don't think they do.
Yeah, I
That
think
hasn't really been an issue for you.
Well, I'm just really severely compromised by my identity.
It's a
So
small
I don't have
gallery
I don't
you
have
have to
a lot of
choose
options.
from.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of options.
That's fair.
yeah,
Phoebe?
I don't think it's necessarily a turn off. Actually one thing that I learned kind of through my publishing process is that like sometimes when they like look at numbers, I'm not really technically good, but there's like they put sort of similar titles in their sort of database when they when things go to like marketing or sales. Um so like some publishers apparently like can only use titles published by them when they're like looking up numbers and things, or like I don't know if it's like devising sales strategies or something. That's like not my area, but they are like kind of
At the very least, they'd
publisher.
be familiar with their own book for a comp.
Yeah. So they would know like, oh, we use this marketing strategy for like, for example, like Jade City, and so they were like really pushing like the Jade City comp for like my book, even though like my book is not nearly as complex or like
There.
doesn't have that big of a like cast or scale or whatever, but because they're sort of like, oh yeah, like here's a book that we published. That is a thing that they do, which I like did not know was a thing until like recently. So it's definitely like I don't think it's a turnoff necessarily. Like they'd be like, oh yeah, cool, like we love that you liked our books enough to comp them. But like I think honestly it's kind of it's fine either way. Like it's not for especially for like just for querying an agent and then for like querying an editor, like I don't think there's necessarily like a you know good or bad to comping like their books versus like a different publisher's
Would
books.
you say that like it's better to think about whether or not the title is a really good match instead of
Mhm.
like in any way trying to
Mhm.
flatter the editor by doing that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you want to flatter the editor, like there's I guess separate ways of being like, oh, I'm
Better
a
ways
huge
to do
fan of
that.
your XYZ titles, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in like the context of a comp.
Fair.
Yeah, I would agree because if if I were an agent and someone tried to come to a book that I was responsible for and they got it wrong, I think I'd write off that person. That would be pretty bad. So if you're going to do that, make sure you do it right.
Mhm.
For sure. Um, okay. So going back to finding comps, do you have any tools that you use to find good books that would be comps? Um, how do you curate your reading list? Do you use bookseller lists, social media trends? Do you get recommendations? What's the best way to kind of build your repertoire to find good comps?
Hmm. I mean, Google used to be better. Now it's pretty useless. It's very hard to. Google has
Like
really
just
degraded.
directly Googling how to find comps.
Not so much how to find comps, but if you're looking for like specific types of stories, like let's say you've written a story about death or grief or like a child losing a parent, then typing that in and typing in next to it. I do this a lot more for my picture books because there's so many picture books. And then the way I'll do it is I'll type in, books about this issue, picture books, and then I'll see what comes up because instantly some books will be suggested to you. Then I look for them in the library because I've got Libby on my phone. So on my Libby app, I'll look for the book and then I instantly read them and I'm like, does this fit? No, it doesn't. So I look for another one and I keep going. It's easier to do with picture books because you can read a picture book really quickly.
Yeah, that helps.
It's it's a little harder when you're writing something a bit bigger. But usually I feel like when I'm writing something bigger, I have a comp already even before I write it. I don't know if that's the case for you guys, but I usually have an idea of what kind of book this is even before I write it.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Um, I was
Have
going to say
started
something and
one.
it went
Well,
away. So maybe Phoebe, because yeah, it would just kind of went in one side and out the other.
oh, Phoebe, and we'll come back to you.
Um,
Yeah, hopefully.
yeah, yeah, I guess I also I think for my more recent projects, I kind of have started off with things that I was inspired by that I ended up using as comps. Um, I think like when I was first sort of building my reading, like so before I started working in publishing, because I like apparently grew up under a rock. I thought that like current fantasy was like the name of the wind, which is now like also
Oh.
really 20 years old.
Still
But
waiting on the last one.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I guess like one thing that really helped me when I like started interning was that like so this was back when Twitter was a thing. But I had this like internship project where I would sort of look at like I had like a starter list of like, oh, here are some authors who are like pretty active in the SFF, adult space. And then I guess I was like cross-referencing like, oh, who do they follow or who do they like interact with and just like compiling a list of like, oh, these are some people who are writing in SFF today. And then that was kind of how I uh, started reading like V. Schwab's work and also like a bunch of other sort of like more current authors. I guess like Twitter is not a thing anymore, but yeah, just kind of like starting off with maybe, like a genre or like an age group that you're interested in writing in and sort of seeing like I don't know like who's like getting nominated for awards, which is not necessarily like, oh, that those are the better ones, but like as a place to kind of be like, oh,
To start,
who
for
is known
sure.
in this space, and then sort of, whose books are they blurbing, who are they interacting with, who are they like friends with, or like whose work are they boosting, and kind of like going from there to sort of expand like your own like reading repertoire, I guess.
I
I
will say
think
I always read the Hugo and Nebula winners because even if I like don't like that particular book, it's always good to know what awards are going to, what people
Mm.
who are critically evaluating in
Yeah,
that
like the
genre space
community.
care about
Yeah.
and are interested in seeing more of.
Mhm.
Goodreads is a good place to find similar books to what you're interested in. So if you look at the book, there'll be like books like this
Yeah,
recommended
you'll
underneath.
Yeah.
curate a pretty
Yeah.
interesting good read
Yeah.
lists from your preferences.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the other places other than Goodreads, you can just look through Amazon. You can ask a librarian. Librarians are usually a lot of help if they have
Mm.
time. Um, and one thing that Moniza said is she was working on comps for a different book. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand is that just because you have that agent, just because you've been published, doesn't mean your search for comps is over.
Mm.
If you have something new, you're probably going to have to find comps for it. So
And
that
I
was,
guess if you re-release something old, you may have to revise your comps
yes,
as well.
yeah, that too. But that was what the thought that I lost a minute ago. Um, and I'll just add something really, really quickly here on Twitter. When I was on Twitter, I followed Matt Bell and Sequoia Nagamatsu, and they happened to know each other. And they were talking about querying authors, and they said they never had to query, both of them.
Really?
They never had to write a query.
How did that work out?
I do not know. Now, with Sequoia, this being his first novel, they were all short stories. So possibly he was invited by an agent to put them together for a novel. I don't know. Matt Bell has been writing for a longer time. Maybe that's why. I don't know, but it kind of was. Yeah, they were talking about that on Twitter.
Wow. I think those are very unusual cases, and the
I,
vast majority of us will not experience this.
oh, I
I'd
think
say.
so. Yes, yes.
I just want to remind people to put any questions in the chat.
Maggie in the chat has a good idea to ask beta readers, your critique partners, your friends. I'm in several different writing groups. I'm writing a book like this. Have you read anything similar to this? Or what's a good book that you're reading lately? I'm in one poetry writing group where the woman who leads it, when she opens the group, one of her questions, we introduce ourselves, and one of her questions is, and what are you reading now? That's always one of her opening questions.
I have run out of my questions, and there are not any more questions in the chat. So let me just ask you guys. Actually, I want to revisit something Mona said when she introduced herself, and just see if the rest of you have any more thoughts on that. What would you say to people, especially who plan to self-publish or indie or whatever, who think that comps might be something that you only need to think about for trad?
What would I say, or them?
All three of you.
Oh, well, I've used them. And I mean, I had a query letter written because I was seeking an agent. And after multiple no's, I mean, I still have a few queries out there, but I may or may not ever hear from them. But I still use my query letter sometimes, depending on the publisher, or sometimes they just ask questions like, what would your book compare to? So you got to know. You just have to know.
I would think you'd need it just for your blurb, right? Even if you're self-publishing. This, I'm not speaking from experience, so correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't you need to kind of indicate to your reader what kind of book this is? And comps are a very efficient way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know some people probably think, well, I'm sure my blurb is fine, but yeah, the specificity of using comps can be extremely beneficial no matter where you're publishing, because it does that quick connection in people's brains to kind of immediately tell you, this is something I kind of want. I'm going to click buy, yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, I imagine I also not speaking from experience, but like I did take a class on publishing in my MFA. So I guess like in terms of marketing and publicity, it does sound like indie presses and also like when you're self-publishing, like they're you're still trying to, you're still trying to like get out the word about your book. And so whether that's like, the indie press, like marketing coordinator or whoever, or if it's just like yourself on, promoting on social media or, wherever, like being able to say like, or to appeal to audiences that, liked, for example, Fourth Wing or something, and being able to like, have that as part of your like talking points, as part of your strategy, I feel like could be helpful, just in terms of, reaching people who have those interests.
Mm,
Although I do feel like
yeah,
there's a
I
bit
think
of a
Fourth
risk.
Wing is one of those things where
Oh, I think Fourth Ring is one of those ones that's kind of risky to use simply because
Yeah.
we're not sure yet if it's a fad book, if anybody knows what I mean.
no, not so much that. I was thinking more like I think it's at Hunger Games level in terms of just
Really?
how
Oh, yeah.
rigid.
Already?
Well,
Okay.
for not in terms of lasting impact. I don't know. I did
That's
not
what I
enjoy,
meant. Yeah.
Mm.
But in terms of like currently the place it occupies, it has launched an entire genre or subgenre.
Mm.
So I think
Well,
romantasy
launch,
is like
but definitely raised.
raised,
Like
done
Dragon
something.
School was always a thing. Dragon Riders of Pern, but this is
Well,
definitely the
it's not
modern
Dragon
revamp
School.
version. Oh no, nothing like it.
Romantasy,
Yeah.
romantasy, romantasy. Like
Yeah.
it's made romantasy a thing. So I would be so wary of using it just because I think it might. Oh, I don't like the books, but
I do
Sorry,
like
that
them, and
was
I'd
just an
still be wary
example.
of
I
using
didn't I
them.
didn't mean to like launch a discourse, but like just
Mhm.
like as an example of like, fans of one book who might
Yeah.
also be interested in a different
I
book.
think it's a good thing to think about though, because like when you have a sudden mass of like potentially rabid fans, like how many of
Mhm.
those are like on the hype wagon and how many of them, like just the story or only care about the
Mhm.
spice or like
Yeah.
who are you collecting from invoking that, right?
Mhm. So yeah, again, like going back to the specificity, being able to
Apparently that's very, very important. Let's hammer
yeah.
that home. Be specific.
Mhm.
Oh. Okay, Maggie H asks, slightly outside of book comps, but can you strengthen your comp list with non-book titles when trying to trad publish versus self-publish versus small press, like game titles or using movies or audio dramas, TV shows? I'm even going to throw podcasts in there, but
yeah,
anything.
100. I've seen people doing it. It can be one of your comps, right? Like Squid Game meets something
Mhm.
else. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. Especially if, say, the book is 20 years old, but the movie just came out last week
Mhm.
and it's perfect. You can comp to that movie.
Would you say it's easier or harder to use these kind of non-book titles when you're doing indie simply because like you're not trying to pitch an actual publisher, or do you think publishers are open to that too?
I think they are.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen authors pitching their books using non-books, like on Twitter pitches and stuff
Mhm.
to agents. I've never
Good to
done it
know.
personally, but I've seen people doing it. I don't know if it's effective. I think it is. I think it
Yeah.
might.
I think it might go back to that specificity. Like if you maybe you don't get the chance to read as much as you like, but if you play a lot of games and you find that like the flow of the narration or the world or the magic system of this one game, comps to your book really well.
Mhm.
Like it might be better to use that than another book that doesn't fit as well.
Yeah.
And also kind of like just the level of mass appeal, while still being specific. Like I have a friend who comped, I think she comped Guts by Olivia Rodrigo. And her book is out now. It's called Midnights with You. It's really good. But it has like I think like as an like thinking about medium, like the oral and sort of like the emotion and sort of the like I don't know, the vibes, right? That has very specific vibe that she also has spoken to like in her like other elements of her like pitch and like talking points. But like there's just something about like the audio nature and sort of the yeah, like the emotions in that album that really does come through in the book. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Is there anything else we haven't brought up yet that you guys want to say about choosing comp titles, using comp titles, finding comp titles?
Yeah, I mean, I think Libby, Goodreads, these are really good tools to find books that you can use as comps or books to read that are similar to what you're trying to do.
And I to go back to one thing that somebody else said. I don't think it's necessary to read the whole book if you don't have time. Um, I have, especially if you're just searching for a comp.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
I've
can
read.
you be sure you read enough of it though to make sure that you're comping it accurately?
Um, just I don't know. I can't answer that for sure, but the blurb, the write up in Goodreads or elsewhere, or reading a section and then going to another section, and if you latch on to something, great, and if you don't, move on, because especially if it's a 600 page
True.
book, um, I think I would need to move on if I am reading half of that and I'm not feeling it. So,
Yeah, you don't want to try comping to Prior of the Orange Trees.
pardon me?
Said, yeah, don't try comping to Priory of the Orange. It's very long. It's a doorstopper.
Oh, okay, okay.
Phoebe?
Yeah, I guess just building off of that. Yeah, I guess if something's not vibing, obviously like I think it's almost like if you see from the blurb like, oh, like this thing that might be similar, and then you're reading it and it's like also not looking up to the promise that the cover copy, then like moving on. But I guess I try to comp like books that I liked, um because and so like books that I would want to finish, just because like uh I'm pitching it to someone else. It's like, oh, it's like this book that I highly disliked. There's a little bit of like dissonance there. So I do try to find things that I do want to read through, just because then I want to be like, oh, this like I'm proud of the book that I wrote, and I also like this other book. Um, and I think they're similar, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't force myself to read something if I don't feel it, whether it's for a comp or not.
Mm.
If I
Yeah.
start a book and I can tell usually the first few pages or the first chapter, and I'm like, nope, not for me, or yeah, and I finish it. So,
I will say I do read books I don't like sometimes for
Mhm.
different reasons. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I'm recommended something and like I'm not vibing with it, but there's something about the book that I do want to understand. Like I want to understand this world or but I can't get past like I have to skip all the sex scenes or whatever. That sort of thing.
Mhm.
hmm. It's funny.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, okay, I guess there is a for the question in the chat, like, what if it's a fix it?
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I feel like there's
Hmm.
also like you can just say you can comp the title without saying you're trying to fix something.
Oh, don't say that. Yeah, that's not a good idea
I
because you
mean,
don't know offend people.
yeah, that's an interesting one because like for a real world example that's been publicly like it's on Instagram. They
Mhm.
talk about it. Sharon J. Zhao definitely wrote Iron Widow as a partial answer to Darling in the Franxx and was very blatant about that. But I'm not sure how much they did or didn't use it in the actual pitch.
Mm.
Hmm. I think it's a risk. And I think maybe you can get away with it if you're writing a specific type of story, like if you're taking something that's problematic and fixing it, maybe you can get
Mm.
away with it. But
Like the
if
non-colonized version of X title.
this title, but less racist, I don't know.
Mm.
There are so many books I would like people to rewrite
Mm.
that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I guess
but
like
I think,
Peter Pan retelling, I kind
oh
of
God, yes.
tried to do that, but
The
yeah,
only thing
I didn't
I
use that as a
wouldn't
comp.
want to rewrite Peter Pan for is because like the copyright goes to orphans still.
Mhm.
Oh,
But yeah,
really?
I had a lot of paperwork to deal with that actually.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think we do not have any more questions. Anyone else have any more thoughts on that? Or not? I think the actual question was if you're inspired to write something out of spite, um, I can't think to think it out of the way, or for how a different story finished, like would you use that title in a comp? But that was the actual question because just for the recording. But yeah, we are kind of getting close to the end of our time. So I guess we will begin our wrap up. We'll go around one more time. Make sure you share where people can find you on the internet, um, what you're working on, and any last thoughts that you want the people to remember about choosing book ops. Moniza, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm Moniza Hussein, and I am actually still on Twitter. So if you're on there, you can find me.
Wow.
I know, right? Last remaining. I'm gonna hold on
It's
to
a
it until
remnant.
Twitter end. Um, Elon might die. You don't know. He might overdose. Can I
Oh
say
dear.
that? I am very sleepy. It's like very late in
Oh,
Singapore. Okay, anyways, yeah, I'm still on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. And yeah, you can find me there. I've got a picture book coming out later this year, so I'm working on kind of promoting that. It's called Street Puppy Masjid Cat, and it's about the unlikely friendship between a pampered cat that lives in a mosque and a stray dog, and it's very cute.
It sounds adorable.
Yeah, thank you.
Phoebe?
yeah. Um, so my website is ph.low.com. Uh, I said dot, ph-low.com. And I'm also on Instagram and on Blue Sky. My debut novel, These Deathless Shores, is out now from Orbit in the US and Angry Robot in the UK. Yeah, it's a gender bent Southeast Asia inspired retelling of Captain Hook origin
Wow.
story.
Okay, I need to look that up immediately. And Mona.
That sounds like a book a friend of mine would really enjoy, Phoebe. So I'm gonna tell them about that. Um, I'm Mona, and my website is listed there in the chat. I also have a link tree, and the link tree goes way back, well, back to 2018, I think. A long link tree. I have a whole lot of publications on there. I have a few poetry books on there. I have two novels as yet unpublished. I'm rewriting the second one. The first one is they're both futuristic. The first one begins in 2169, and the second one begins about 2,000 years after that. So they're very futuristic.
Yeah.
And kind of, anyway, what else did you want to know? I forgot.
Where people could find you, what you're working on, and anything you want them to remember about
I'll put my
book
link
ops.
tree in the chat too. Um, just remember about comps that if you're not seeking traditional publishing, you still need them. That's the main thing to remember. So I'll put my link tree in here.
Yep. We will have links to all of the stuff in the chats. And remember, we can move to Discord to continue the discussion over there and ask some of the panelists. I think they'll hang out there for a little bit if they have any further questions that people want to
I
ask.
think that's it. I may have
Yeah,
typed it wrong.
awesome. Thanks for that, Mona.